Hey there, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you
All
hear me?
right. Yeah. All right, cool. So we're up and running.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I were in here or not. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, we'll make it work. I wanted to try one of the share functions really quick.
And I don't know if we are seen right now or not.
I think we would be. Oh, okay. So how does this work? Okay. That does not interface like I was hoping it would. All right, well. See, the whole practice thing was a really cool idea. There's just some functions I couldn't do in the practice or in the practice version of it that I really wanted to do.
I couldn't get into it. I had to do something else later that day, so I thought to come back to it, and then it wasn't there. So I was like, "Holy crap! I don't know." We'll see how it goes.
Okay, so if I go full screen, does it let me? No, it does not. Okay. Ugh. You know what? I don't like doing this, but I think I'm just going to have to end up sharing my entire screen to make this work. It is not my preference. Okay, so are you seeing my screen right now?
No.
Do you have to give me permission to do that?
I don't know. I've got actually it was X'd out the screen, so let me see if this down at the bottom where you see the little screen, is it X'd out there for you, or is it?
Yeah, with the red line through it.
Yeah, un-X, and then you should be able to secure it.
Yeah, when I do that and I go to hit share, I highlight, I want to share my entire screen. The share button pops up. I hit that and it goes back to being X'd out when I press it.
Okay, let me send somebody a note and see if I can.
Can you share your screen? Like, you want to just experiment real quick?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Is mine coming up?
Mm-mm.
Oh, share system audio. No. Okay, what you need to do is click on what you want to share, where it says entire, then you can get option to share it. Try that.
Right. So I wanted to share my entire screen.
Now where the little picture of your screen comes up, click on the screen.
Yep.
And then it should make that share button turn blue.
It does.
Now does it? Now try to share.
And then when I click share, after clicking once it highlights blue, it closes out and my little share icon is redlined again.
Okay, let me try it then. I've got your, oops, now I can't see. Okay.
It's working for you.
Okay, so let me see if I can get your PowerPoint up there.
Erg.
Is it showing?
Yeah, it's showing.
The problem is I can't see the screen.
This is a bummer.
Oops. Oops.
Okay, is there some sort of security setting I'm not doing? That is so strange. What happens if I do? Nope. It just keeps defaulting back to that screen share thing. All right.
Did you put it?
Kind of. Are you seeing?
I saw it just a second ago.
So are you seeing just the PowerPoint thing
I see
now?
just the PowerPoint.
Not the notes, not the whole background, everything else?
Right, just the PowerPoint.
Okay. Well, I think that will work then. So now you're back to seeing me.
Yeah.
And now you're back to seeing just the presentation. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And then I can see you on the bottom there.
Okay, so I'm still showing.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Got it. All right. There we go.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Yeah, we're ready. So are you seeing just, let's see, there's 2 of 7.
No, right now I was seeing you and me.
Okay, and you go to people. Looks like someone. Hello, Tim Snow, if you have joined us. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, there's several people there now, so.
Do you think we should give folks just a couple of minutes to wander into the session, or just roll with it?
Okay, we'll give you, we're just getting started here, and we'll give people a few more minutes to get into the session. We'll start in a couple minutes. How's that?
Thanks, Tim. Tim says it looks good. Hey, we try. We try.
So, okay. I think, yeah, we'll give them just a couple more minutes and see how many people we have here.
Tim Snow, it says you're a reference librarian. Where are you a reference librarian? Where are you joining us from?
He's my reference librarian, so he's from Rio.
Oh, okay. There you go. Mystery solved.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grant Writing. This session features Kent. Well, I'm Mulcahy. That's it, right?
Like the priest in MASH.
Yeah, MASH, that's right. From Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library. I'm Amy Wilson. I'm the director of the Davis Library at the University of Rio Grande and Rio Grande Community College, which is located in Rio Grande, Ohio, which is in Gallia County in the Ohio Appalachian region. Before I introduce Kent, I just want to address something about grant writing. A lot of the topic he's going to cover deals with nonprofit sector. However, a lot of the information is applicable to business planning. So if don't be thrown off by a lot of talk about nonprofits, this information can help you with your business planning and stating your cases to investors and loan agencies. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Kent and let him get started.
All right. Thanks, Amy. So my name is Kent Mulcahy. I'm the Grants Resource Librarian at the Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library, as she says. And I do just want to, I know she just said this, but I do want to reiterate it one last time before I go into it. Yeah, my background, my training, my expertise, the grant resources we offer here at the Cincinnati Library, pretty much all centers around 501c3 nonprofits. So technically, the presentation I'm going to be sharing with you today was designed for nonprofit organizations. Now, I'm told that a lot of folks who are joining us today are also, there's a nonprofit element to what they do, or they're curious about it. And so that's great. But I do get asked a lot to do these presentations for businesses because, as she said, if not the fact that, hey, technically the proposals I'm talking about you would send to a nonprofit, what I hope to do is kind of inform the way you think about speaking to potential funders, potential investors. Maybe you're, like she said, applying for a loan. I just want you to kind of think from the perspective of how does what you do benefit the community? Because, for most for-profit things, there's going to be a benefit to the community. So we're going to be talking about the typical elements of a proposal that go into a nonprofit proposal, but these typical elements will hopefully get you to think differently about business proposals, business plans, all the kinds of applications that you can do. So I just wanted to throw that out there one more time. I'll try to be really careful. If I'm talking about something in the presentation that is definitely more in the nonprofit world than the business world, I will try to remember to point that out. But the bulk of what you're going to see today will definitely inform a lot of what you do. So that's my one caveat I wanted to get out there. I'm so excited. I'm so glad that I was asked to speak at this. I hope you enjoy it. And with that, let's dive right into this and get into the presentation. All right. So it looks like you should be seeing my screen right now. So as it says, we are going to do Introduction to Proposal Writing. So what are we going to be talking about today? We are going to be talking about the basic components of writing and submitting a nonprofit project proposal. And one of the things that we're not going to do today, we are not going to look at an example of a proposal. We're not going to look at a single line of an example of an actual proposal. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I have until 2:55 today. If you wanted to crawl through a proposal line by line, what do you say we get started now and we'll wrap up at 1:30 tomorrow, right? That would take way too long. But that's not even the real reason. The real reason is, let's say we did do a 24-hour marathon session where we looked through a proposal, top to bottom, line by line, looked at a sample of an actual proposal. Great. You go to apply to your first grant, you get the proposal packet, and you're like, whoa, wait, hold on a second. This looks nothing like what that dude Kent showed me. So the main reason is that all proposals are different. You can't look at an example of a proposal and then be prepared to just start writing every proposal to everyone. Each person you apply to, each organization will be vastly different, formatted differently, what they ask for will be different. So the best we can do for an introductory session on grant writing would be to talk about the typical elements of a proposal that you are going to see in almost any proposal that lands in front of you, okay? The format may be different, order may be different, but the raw data that we're going to talk about will likely be in every proposal that you write. So let's go ahead and talk about the proposal writing process. This is going to be a pretty simplified slide that I'm going to show you. There's going to be 4 elements of a proposal writing process. And, you know, this is introductory, right? So we could go way into the weeds, but let's just keep it simple for this. The first step is going to be the planning, which is very just simply, what do you need the money for? You know, for the for-profit side of things, this might be a little more straightforward, right? For my people that are joining me with nonprofit things, this is a bigger question that we could probably dedicate a whole session to. For my nonprofit people, funders, in the eyes of funders, there are 2 types of projects you're applying to grants for: good old-fashioned projects or overhead costs, right? So good old-fashioned projects in the nonprofit world, a food drive, a clothing drive, an animal adoption event. Everything else is overhead costs: paying someone's salary, renovating your building, buying or purchasing a building. These are overhead costs. In the nonprofit world, funders like to fund projects. They're not as usually as excited to fund overhead costs. So when they say, what are you actually asking the money for? You want to think about, is it worth the time spending your grant writing for overhead costs that are typically harder to fund? Or do you want to do your grant writing for things that the foundation funders out there are generally more stoked to fund? A lot of people save their individual giving, individual contributions, online social media campaigns. They save that money for their overhead costs, because then you can kind of do what you want with it. So really think about what you're going to be asking for before you start sending out proposals and talking to people, which brings me to the research stage of things. Who will you approach? Now, one thing I always preach, my background is much more in funder research than it is proposal writing, right? And there's a reason for that. I tend to make the argument that researching and finding the right funder matches is as important, if not more important, than writing the world's perfect proposal. Because for one reason, there's no such thing as a proposal that could not be improved upon a little. You could always go back in and change something to make it a little different. But the real reason is, let's hypothetically say you did write the world's best proposal ever written. Congratulations, you did it. If you send it to a funder that has never expressed interest in what you do, the type of business you're trying to open, the type of nonprofit project you're doing, if you send it to a funder whose mission statement doesn't align with yours, what they've typically funded in the past isn't similar to what your organization is, you're not going to change their mind with the world's most perfect proposal. Whereas, if you send a proposal that's good but could use a little work, if you send that proposal to the perfect funder, you will likely get them into the room where the conversation could go like, hey, you know what? We're really interested in what you're doing. We like your organization. We have a couple of questions about your proposal. There's a couple of things that we have questions about, but let's keep talking about it. That can happen. So for my money, I think people don't spend enough time researching the right funders. I think they get way too into their own head about, well, I've never written a grant proposal. It's very scary. Sure, it's intimidating. But all of your fretting and worrying will not amount to anything if you send it to the wrong people. So you really need to research those funders. I know for my nonprofit folks, or if you're interested in the nonprofit side of things, there's a database called the Foundation Directory online, which we, the Cincinnati Library, give you free access to. That's the industry standard tool for nonprofit funder prospecting. So just wanted to really throw the research, I really wanted to get in your face about the research portion on that. Which brings us finally to the writing, how to put it all together. I could make this entire presentation. I could wrap it up in the next 30 seconds if we wanted to. How do you write a proposal? You follow the funder's directions. That's it. That's the long and short of it. But there's more to it than that. And so what I am getting at by the how do you put it all together portion, no matter the order that a funder asks for things in, there are sometimes smarter ways to put everything together. Like even if they ask for things like in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Maybe it would be beneficial for you to do put your data together for step 4 first, and then step 5, and then go back and tackle 1. So we're just going to talk about strategies for assembling all of the information that could be asked of you. And then the follow-up. What do you do once the decision has been made? Well, you're going to get a yes or a no, right? In the nonprofit world, grant seeking in the nonprofit world, and really grant seeking in general, you're always going to be sending out lots of grant proposals for a single project or, whatever you're trying to fund. In general, funders say that they can only fund about 30% of the proposals that they get. And usually the reasoning is just, well, we can't fund everybody. So if you kind of extrapolate that a little bit, you are likely not going to get yeses on every single proposal that you send out. That's okay, that's expected, but we're going to talk about how to leverage a no to help you become a better grant writer. So that's kind of the structure we're going to take on all of this. Oh, and by the way, I want to highlight one thing. This research portion, I just got to do a little self-promotion. If anyone is definitely interested in the nonprofit side of things, I mentioned that database, the Foundation Directory Online for nonprofits to research potential foundation funders. I do a virtual session on the Foundation Directory Online every single month. It's free here at the library. If anyone's interested, I highly recommend you sign up for that. Actually, I'm doing one tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So if anyone has any questions, email me outside of today's session, and I'd be happy to let you know a little more about that. All right, so planning. The first important step. So I wish you could see my notes right now. There's a lot to unpack in this slide. And my notes that I have in front of me, those TV shows, those movies where someone starts there's a conspiracy theory. They really start getting into the conspiracy theory and they start writing on their apartment walls and putting Post-it notes and drawing and lines, attaching everything together. That's what this page looked like on my notes. So buckle up while I try to get through this and in a way that makes sense. So first of all, what's the first thing you should do when you're planning? You need to make sure you give yourself enough time. And there's a very, the most obvious thing that comes to mind of that is, well, when is the grant proposal due? And yeah, you want to give yourself enough time to get it done. And sure, most grant proposals are submitted online these days. If the grant proposal is due at midnight and you submit yours at 11:59, it's going to be time stamped. And if someone's looking, they're probably going to know you slid it right in under the door and probably didn't get much chance for revising and editing. So you do want to give yourself enough time for that. But there's more to it than that. Let's talk about research and writing time. Now, I'm going to throw some numbers at you, and I know someone watching today is going to say, oh, I talked to someone, and they said it didn't take them half as long as you say it does to do these type of things. Sure, I know that. And you know what? The more you do this type of thing, the faster you're going to get at it. Sure. But let's just say if you're brand new to it. What about the research part that I kept, hammering home about the researching who you're going to apply to? It is recommended that you spend 20 to 40 hours just researching potential funders, not applying, not reaching out to them, just researching what's out there and finding the best matches for you. Now, on top of that, when you send out your first round of proposals, if you ask an average of folks, they say, hey, the first time you ever sent out a round of proposals, how long did it take you to get all the writing done? They say 40 to 100 hours of writing time. I know, sounds scary. You'll find ways to whittle that down. But the point is, if you see, oh, hey, there's a grant, there's a proposal coming up, there's something I need to fund, and I want to get this up and running in a week. Grant funding is probably not going to get you there. It's a long game. But there's another aspect of how much time do you have, and this is especially true in the nonprofit world. On average, from the time that a funder says, yes, we got your proposal, we love it, we are going to fund you, we're going to send you a check, it can take up to 6 to 9 months from that yes for that check to fall in your lap. Now, yes, I definitely know of a ton of examples where it was quicker than that. Absolutely. But it can take that long. So in general, what a lot of the best grant writers recommend is that you think of grant writing as a long game, like a year out. That way, you have plenty of time to get everything done before your project needs to start. So that's what I think they mean by make sure you give yourself enough time. Another thing, especially in the nonprofit world, make sure you solidify on an asking point, like how much you're going to ask for, because, for a project, a single project, you're going to send out multiple grants. Each funder that you send a grant proposal to, each of them will have typical amounts they grant to your cause. So you may ask, the one funder might typically fund $15,000 in grants. Another funder might do smaller grants, maybe just $1,000 or $2,000. So you really need to research and find out what they typically give to your type of cause. Another thing you're going to want to think about is, how are you going to juggle these multiple grants? And we have lots of great grant writing books at the library. And for each of them, if you were to look at them, they're all going to have somewhere in there something called a funding plan template. It's basically a spreadsheet, right? And it helps you keep track of things like, well, for a given funder, as you start talking to people and amassing contact info, write down the name of the person and what they do within the organization so you can get right to the point of who you need to talk to. Their contact info, who on your team is responsible for what. So you're kind of making a job knowledge tree within this spreadsheet. So if a funder reaches out to you and says, we have a question about this part of your project, you know who on your team you can go to get them the best answer. You'll want to put in there how much you're asking for from a given funder. Just any little bit of info, like and eventually the result. Did you get a yes or did you get a no? And that way you can come back and reference it later. But you need to have some sort of funding plan template available to you, and something you're going to want to keep in a cloud. It's not something you're going to want to print out and keep updating. You want to have this to be able to quickly access on your phone. You're out and about on the city, you're at some sort of cocktail party, you see a funder you know you're going to apply to, you can quickly pull that up, get the info you need to have an informed conversation with them. So that is also something you need to keep in mind. Make sure you organize it, because it's easy to get details mixed up. Like funders say all the time that they will talk to one person from an organization on a Tuesday, and that person will say, we are looking forward to submitting our grant proposal to you for $5,000. The next day, they'll talk to someone else from the same project who says, we're going to submit a proposal to you for $50,000. So make sure everyone's on the same page there. So that's one of the very important steps of planning. And another thing, so we partner with an organization to bring these presentations to folks. So, full disclosure, I didn't put all of this slideshow together. And so this slide itself that you're seeing of these people sitting around a table, I didn't pick this slide. Now, I don't know, whoever did put this together, I don't know if they picked this. Hey, look at this. They're working around a table. These are action words, success words. They're drinking coffee and they have iPads there. These are power players, right? When I look at this, though, I see a team. And if possible, you really want to surround yourself with a team of people, because no one person can be an expert on everything. The example I always use in my grants classes is that, look, if you want me to write your proposal, I can do that okay. I can research the funders, I can write decently. But if you put me in charge of your budget or anything having to do with numbers, you're not going to get funding, and you might even go to jail. I have a very troubled relationship with numbers, and I always will. So I will want to have someone near me at all times that I can go, hey, talk to me about, I'm getting a question about this budget or how much we're asking for. I need your expertise on these numbers. So try to surround yourself with a team when possible. Now, I know a lot of folks are running, small organizations. It may not be possible for you to have a team. In that case, if there is someone in your organization, even if they can't pile on and really be a part of the grant writing process and all of that, at least warn them ahead of time. Hey, guess what? I am going to be annoying you a lot over the next few weeks with a lot of questions so I can get your expertise. So, just prep people for that. So that's a very important first step that I think gets over, just planning in general. They just go into it and say, I'm just going to send out a bunch of proposals. Probably not the best approach. So yeah, we already covered this. Do you have enough time? And be very specific about, I already talked about earlier, what are you asking for? This is especially true in the nonprofit world. That was the whole discussion of, are you asking for funding for a project or overhead costs? And just to reiterate, in the nonprofit world, at least, funders tend to like to fund overhead costs, or said that exactly backwards. Funders tend to like to fund projects as opposed to overhead costs. Right. And then really, I've kind of hammered this, quite a bit already, research, finding the right fit. How does what you do fit with the funder's interest? And I think the best example that I can give of this is, let's go back, I'm the nonprofit, the Grants and Nonprofits librarian. Probably about once every 2 weeks, I get an email from someone that says, I just started a nonprofit 2 weeks ago. I need a little bit of money. I think I'm going to apply to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a $500 grant. Well, hold on a second there. Does the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have $500 laying around somewhere? From what I understand, yes, they probably do. However, unless you are an organization that is going to go over to a developing country and use technology to combat a health crisis head on, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation probably doesn't have $500 for you. The point I'm making is it's not name recognition. It's not how much money they have in their bank account that makes a funder the right match for you. The right match is what type of organizations and what type of projects have they historically liked to fund in the past. Other things like, well, how much money are you asking for? Some organizations give micro grants. Some organizations give very large grants. So if you're only applying for a small amount of money, there are some organizations that won't be a good fit because they don't give small grants. So again, I get a lot of pushback from folks new at this of like, well, have you looked into the blah, blah, blah foundation? Like, oh, I've never heard of them. They don't even have a website. They comparatively, their bank account isn't very large. Sure. But again, I'm pointing people towards those organizations because they've funded similar organizations in the past. So you really got to think about, in the nonprofit world, your mission statements will align. In the nonprofit world, a family foundation will outwardly state what they're interested in funding. If your mission statement aligns, you're probably on the right track. In the business world, you just need to think about things like, what size organizations do they typically fund? What kinds of organizations? What have they funded in the past? So it's about the right fit. It's not about name recognition or about how much money they have. The why is just as important as the who. I mean, you know what? I keep saying I'm going to go back and change the slide. The why is way more important than the who, almost all the time. Which brings us to the actual writing of your proposal, which I'm sure everyone thought the whole thing was going to be about. So who should write the proposal? Now, what I'm about to say can easily come off as grammar snobbish, and I don't mean it that way. And hopefully I'll be able to illustrate something to you that'll help you see why I don't mean that. Who should write the proposal? Well, yeah, I mean, whoever writes your proposal should be a decent writer. And again, this is the part that I think people are going to think I'm a grammar snob. Whoever writes your proposal, it's the little things. They should know the difference between to, and to, and there, and there. And the reason for that is not because someone will review your proposal and say, they're not good writers. I know what they're getting at and I like their business, but they don't know how to write, so I'm not going to fund them. It's not that. Let's say a funder gets 2 proposals from 2 organizations, Organization A, Organization B. These organizations are almost exactly the same type of business. They're asking for a grant for almost the exact same type of thing, same amount of money. But Organization A's proposal is just written a little better. The funder will likely be able to understand exactly where their money will be going and be able to understand how Organization A, how they are actually going to be able to do what they say they're going to do. So it's not about being a grammar snob. It's about understanding where their money's going and building your credibility as an organization. That's why it's important to have someone someone who's a good writer. It just helps the funder understand what's going on. So yeah, you do need to have someone who's a good writer do that. The other thing is one person should write the whole darn thing. And the reason for that is simple. The whole thing, top to bottom, has to be in one voice, right? A lot of times I've heard people who review grants, boards on foundations and things, they will say, sometimes I'll be reading a proposal. I'll be going along. It's going great. I like it. I'm seeing where they're going. And then all of a sudden, I don't know why, but I just kind of lose it. And on the surface, it's still well written. I can get their point, but something's different and it kind of gets me out of it and I can't follow it. Probably what happened was the writing got handed over to someone else somewhere along the way and the voice changed. So the way that you would do that is, you remember me saying, I'm not your numbers person. I would make sure that I let, our person in our accounting area, I'm going to say, hey, Jenny, I need to talk to you for a second about this budget. I want to get your expertise. And then I'll, sit down, have a conversation with Jenny. I'll take notes from her, get her expertise. Then I'll go back and I'll write up the budget narrative, which is basically your line item budget in storybook form. I'll write that out. That way it's my voice, but with Jenny's numbers expertise. I then send that back over to her and I say, hey, will you read over this budget narrative I wrote out of our conversation? Can you tell me if I have everything on track? That way it stays my voice, but I get the expertise of someone who knows a lot more than me. So that's just a couple of things about the writing that you need to keep in mind. As far as format, I could go back like, oh, what format should the grant take? Remember how I said I could basically make this class 30 seconds long? The format will be in whatever format the funder wants it in. It's the long and short. That's the long and short of it. As a matter of fact, I always like this example. Hopefully they don't do this to kids anymore. I remember, I think it was 2nd or 3rd grade. I got to class. Every kid's desk had a piece of paper on it with like 40 instructions, right? Do this, do this, do this. It started out simple enough, but by the end of it, the instructions were getting really weird. Like, get out of your seat, hop on one foot, and quack like a duck, right? So I get down to that one, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm moving through this really fast. So I step out of my desk, I'm quacking like a duck, and I'm looking around the room, and I'm like, man, none of the smart kids are actually doing this. Well, number 40 out of 40 instructions was, do not do any of the previous instructions. So what that was a test was of, can you follow instructions? So when you get a grant proposal packet, read the whole thing top to bottom before you get started, because grant writing is about following directions, right? If a funder wants something in a certain font, but you don't like that font, tough, use that font. I don't like the spacing that a certain funder wants me to put this in. Doesn't matter. It's what you do. If I have heard actually recent examples of a funder still wanting a hard copy printed packet, and they specify the type of paper that they want it on. So it's all about following directions. All of that said, as you should see on the screen, yeah, grant makers are mostly moving to more online formats. In fact, I would say almost all of them are online formats as well. So there's just a couple of things to think about when you're doing that. First of all, for an online format, let's say there's a text box and it says, tell us a little bit about the history of your organization, right? You should never compose off the top of your head into a text box. You should use a dedicated word processing program like Microsoft Word. And the reason for that is simply because, depending on what browser you're using or your browser settings, a dedicated word processing program will probably have better grammar and spelling functions than would just your internet browser. So that's one reason to do it. Another reason to never type into just a web form text box, but instead to use a word processing program. Here's what you're going to see most of the time. Tell us a little bit about your organization in 300 words or less. So most online web portals they'll let you type to the 300 word limit, and then you won't be able to type anymore. It'll cut you off. No more. You've reached that limit. Some, maybe the font color will change. And that way you've gone over the limit. Not a lot, but some will let you type to your heart's content. But then when you hit submit, it only submits the 300 words. If you're using a word processing program, you can constantly keep check on how many words you've written or how many characters you've written. So that's another reason to use a word processing program. Another little tip about online formats, before you get started, double, triple, quadruple check that you can save your progress and come back to it. I think it'll be very rare these days when you go to a grant submission portal and it doesn't let you save your progress and work on it intermittently. But what you don't want is, oh, okay, it's 4:57. Time to wrap up and come back to this tomorrow morning. Let's hit the save button. Oh no, where's the save button? And it comes to find out you do have to finish it in one sitting. So if it's not abundantly clear that you can save your progress and come back to it, reach out to whatever organization's hosting it and see if you can, and make sure you're not missing something. So that's just a couple of tips about online formats. But yeah, basically, if you wanted to boil all that down, always follow the funder's guidelines. That's it. So typical proposal elements. Now, yes, this is something where this was designed for nonprofit organizations, but I think you'll find most of this is pretty much applicable to any situation. And by the way, we're going to talk about these a little more, each of these elements a little more in depth in the coming slides. But on the rare occasion, and this is especially for my nonprofit folks, on the rare occasion that you come across a funder and they say, hey, send me a grant proposal, and they don't really specify how they want everything structured, first reach out to them and say, well, how do you want everything structured? If they say, I don't know, just get it to us, which is rarely going to happen again, The order that you see on your screen right now, this is a pretty good rough draft of, if you're just given free reign over how to do it, this is a pretty good rough draft on how to put everything together. So we'll talk about all of these one by one. The first is the executive summary. First thing in almost any grant proposal you're going to put together will be an executive summary, but guess what? We are going to talk about that last today for reasons that will make sense later. Which brings us to the narrative. It's kind of hard to see, but the word narrative is highlighted a little bit, and these down here fall under that. The narrative makes up the bulk of your proposal. If you want to pretend you were actually submitting a hard copy version, you were printing everything out, the narrative would take up the most pages in your entire proposal. The narrative consists of a statement of need, a project description, a little bit about your organization, some information about your organization, and the conclusion. And yeah, so we will talk about these individually in a couple of slides. And then the budget and the supporting materials. Now, as for the budget, we're not really going to get into budgets today because, you know, again, like I say, that's not my area of expertise, but also because we're really going to focus more on the writing portions of grant proposals. I think that's what we kind of more need to talk about. That's what intimidates a lot of folks. It's just, how do I talk about it? How do I write about everything? What do I include? Now, for my folks that are joining me and they are interested in the nonprofit side of things, if you have questions about nonprofit proposal budgets, email me outside of today's session because I have some great resources, some great videos to share with you. And then there are supporting materials. Again, we will unpack all of these, you know, in the coming slides as they come up. So let's go ahead and move on to, what do funders really want to know? Again, this is I could make this very quick for you. I could easily just say, what do funders want to know? They want to know everything. Everything. You cannot bore them. Now, I'll talk that whole thing about, like, well, can you really not bore people? Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. But some of the things you need to think about, I like to think about it this way, actually. I remember apparently I'm talking a lot about elementary school today. This is the second time I'm going to reference elementary school. I hope they still do units on journalism in school because I loved those units when I was a kid. But hopefully some people will remember what I'm going to say. You know, you do a basic unit on journalism and they say that good journalists talk about the who, what, where, when, why, how. I think I got all of them, and I think I didn't repeat any. But yeah, that's really what funders want to know. Timelines, who's doing what, why are you doing what you're doing, how are you doing it? They're really going to want to know everything, which brings us to, what specific need are you addressing? Now, this can go one of two ways. I think a lot of times in the business world, you're basically going to illustrate, well, there's probably a business out there, at least tangentially similar to the one you're trying to start. What are you doing that other ones aren't? You know, in the nonprofit world, what specific need are you addressing is best illustrated. Like, I get a lot of people who come to me, I want to start a nonprofit that tackles the drug problem. The drug problem, what? For everyone, everywhere, all types of drugs, all ages, you know, all demographics? Probably not. So make sure you're being very specific about the need of your organization or the project you're trying to fund. It'll help you stand out. And again, it goes back to helping the funder know exactly where their money is going. And then definitely make sure it fits the size and scale of your solution. So whatever the need is, take a good look at how many people you have in your organization, the expertise that you have. Basically, it comes down to, are you really going to be able to do what you say you are going to do? So that's what that one's about. And then, you know, think about specifically, what audience and what community are you serving, and what evidence do you have to support the need? So, you know, as far as the audience and community, that goes back, that can help you fill in. Yeah, there are businesses similar to what we do, but they are in locations or they seem to cater to a certain demographic. Here's what we're doing. You know, in the nonprofit world, it's like, sure, there's a dog rescue, but we are looking into a specific breed of dog that tends to get overlooked in the area. Those type of things. Anything can matter. It can make an impact on that. But the other thing is, you need to have evidence to support the need, whatever your need is. And, you know, to be honest with you, in the nonprofit world, if a funder's interested in your cause, they are probably aware of the stats you're going to share with them because they're interested in it too. If you are applying for a business loan, the bottom line is these people have seen everything. So a lot of times you may not be showing them stats that they didn't already know, but they are going to want to know that you know them too. Going back to my example of a nonprofit that combats the drug problem, I could easily say right now, the greater Cincinnati area has an issue with drug addiction. I don't think anyone's going to raise their hand and contradict me on that, but that also doesn't mean I'm an expert on the matter. Anyone can look out their window and identify problems. Whoever you're applying to funding to wants to know that you really got in, you really did the research, you know the numbers, you know the areas most impacted by a problem or the areas least served by other types of businesses. They need to have evidence. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was an organization out there that gave people free help in finding information and data and facts? Wouldn't it just be wonderful? Oh yeah, public libraries. So wherever you're joining us from today, there's probably a public library that can at least point you in the right direction. We here at the Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library, we definitely have staff on hand to help you navigate the resources. Now, one important caveat when you're reaching out for help for gathering statistics, we are public libraries. We're not research libraries. Basically what that means is we probably won't be able to do your full project for you. We won't be able to just libraries don't have the staffing anymore to just be like, oh, I'm looking for this stat. Okay, let us all get together and just do your research project for you. Probably won't be able to do that unless it's a stat that's just easily grabbed. But we will help point you toward the resources you need, and we'll help teach you how to use them. So we're definitely here to help with that. But at some point, you will have evidence. You will need to support evidence for why you're doing what you're doing. Which brings us to another thing you're going to have to think about is what are you going to be trying to achieve? Now, your outcomes are going to have to be measurable. In nonprofits, it's going to be community impact. Did your goal do the great things you said you were going to do? Business, a lot of times, most of the time, I guess it's going to come down to your bottom line. What are your earnings? Are you going to meet that? Now, I guess some of this in some ways might be a little more nonprofit oriented, but I guess not. Which brings us to these goals and objectives, the SMART acronym, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. This is the kind of thing you would see printed out and posted up in office cubicles a lot. Goals and objectives, they need to be SMART. They need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. We'll unpack all these a little bit, but specific goals, you're not going to be able to say at the end, okay, we'll give you your funding, and at the end, tell us, show us how you were successful. You can't just say, yes, we were successful. You've got to be able to back it up. What impact did you have? What numbers? They need to be measurable. Again, you have to be able to put a number or something on it that illustrates how you chose to measure your impact or measure your success. You can't just say, yes, we're successful or no, we're not. Your goals need to be achievable. And it's going to be glaring to most funders if you've got your head in the clouds a little bit, either about what your nonprofit's impact will be, or maybe what your bottom line is going to be for your business. So they need to be achievable and realistic, and then they need to be timely. This is something else we'll talk about a little bit more. There will probably be a cutoff point where a funder will say, okay, at this point, this is where we're going to take a look at your numbers and we'll see if our funding had an impact. And if you did what you did with our money, did it help you get where you were going? So there will be a time stamp. Even, hopefully your business will go on in perpetuity. For some nonprofits, your project will be a never-ending project, but there will be a time cutoff where a funder checks in and says, did we meet our goals or not? So we'll talk about these a little bit more in the coming slides. And a couple slides from here, actually. So what are your strategies for making it happen? This is really, I guess, if I wanted to say, I should have saved it a little bit longer, but this is where the who, what, when, where, why, and how comes in. They really want to know what everything you're going to, and now I can say this is especially true in the nonprofit world. You are not going to bore anyone because, as we'll talk about a little bit later, for most people, there's a review board of a few people who will look over your proposal. Those people will have areas of expertise. One person may really focus on one part of your proposal. Another person will focus on the other. So not everyone is going to read every page of your proposal. So in other words, you're not going to bore them because they're probably going to jump to their area of expertise. One thing to try to get the point illustrated to some of my library and my nonprofit customers is, one thing you could even include is we will be meeting we're going to be using one of the library's free meeting rooms to get together as a group every Tuesday night at 7:00 and talk about where our progress is. Now, for some people, they would look at that and say, well, that doesn't really matter to me. But, you catch the right person and they're going to say, wow, these people are really proactive. They don't let things sneak up on them. They are going to really stay on top of this. I like that. So you really need to share every detail with them. Another reason to really go into detail as far as your narrative of how you're going to do what you say you're going to do is it can almost serve as like an organization plan for you. You may have already written out in bullet points what your plan is, but when you see it written out in story form, it might help you see gaps that you didn't know that were there. The converse, or not the converse, but another thing that can happen from this, if you really go into detail, what a lot of people say is, people who have written proposals and heard back from funders, the funder will write back and they'll say, we're interested in what you're doing. We like what you're doing, but we have questions about one thing. This thing you're doing right here. We've seen people try this and it doesn't work. Now, do you want to hear that? You don't. You spend a lot of time on it. So no one likes to get their papers sent back to them marked up in red ink, which I don't think is how teachers grade papers anymore. But also, don't you want to know that? These funders have seen everything. So if they're telling you that they're interested in funding you, but they know part of your plan isn't going to work out the way you think it's going to, you need to listen to their advice. They have seen everything. So all of that is to say, the more detail you give, the more potential funders have to give you feedback on what your plan is. So really, really don't worry about boring them. So what is your specific plan? Think of it as an organization plan. That's just, I just can't stress that enough. As you are putting your narrative together, it can help you catch things that you would not have caught otherwise. So, which brings us to, how do you know if you are successful? So let's talk about measurements for a second. This is, we're calling this kind of an introduction to grants for entrepreneurs, an introduction to grant writing. So let's boil it down, let's oversimplify it, and let's just pretend there are two types of measurements, quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative measurements, I think, again, as I said before, for-profit business side of things, not totally my thing. So I may be wrong about this, but I would think that, quantitative measurements, things you can put a hard number on, that's the important thing on the business side of the world. But there are also qualitative measurements that are more of like an intangible emotional nature. Now, quantitative measurements, we're putting a number on it. They're easier to measure. I'm not saying it's easy to do, like it's not easy to meet your goal just because you're using quantitative measurements, but it's easy. Hey, we hit our target or we didn't. Qualitative, I think, probably applies more to anyone who's interested in nonprofits out there. Like, what if your nonprofit mission was to, I'm going to improve the self-esteem of 6th grade girls in a certain school district, right? How do you put a number on that? What do you do? Like at the beginning of your project, send out a questionnaire. Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? I guess you could do that, but it seems a little insensitive, right? So in that case, and I'm just making this up, there's no one answer to this. Maybe you're going to do testimonials. Once someone has gone through your whole program, circle back to them and say, on a scale, like, tell us about like some of the things you liked about this project. How did it help you? Maybe there are quantitative measurements that you could apply that aren't your real goal. Maybe like because you improved their confidence, their attendance went up in school. Maybe their test scores were raised. All I'm saying is, if you're not doing something that is a straight quantitative, here's a number, we hit that target or not, you need to be more, need to get more creative about how you're going to measure it. And really quick, for my nonprofit people who might be doing more qualitative type things, more emotional nature type projects, the Kellogg Foundation's website, which is wkkf.org, wkkf.org, They have a free ebook that you can download. If you just go to their website and search the site for Evaluation Handbook, they have one of the best measurement books I've ever seen. And, I'm not going to say that your specific project is going to be in there explicitly, but there will likely be something similar enough that it kind of inspires you on how, you go about measuring yours. So you just really got to think about how if you're successful, and you'll need to explain in your proposal why you landed on how you're going to measure things. So they need to know that. So when you think about evaluation, you need to specify program objectives in measurable terms. You need to identify key indicators of success. You do need to outline how you're going to collect your data and how you're going to analyze it so they understand where your headspace is. And then also develop a timeline to monitor the success of the program on an ongoing basis, which let's talk about assessments for a second. Again, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to pretend there are two types of assessments: formative assessments, summative assessments. Summative assessments are, I guess, in some ways the simpler of the two, just to wrap your head around. Sum of all things. We're going to sum it up. It's at the end. You take stock, you assess it, and you say, did we have the impact that we wanted? Did we do what we say we were going to do? So, that's the end. But you also really need to think about formative assessments. So let's say, actually, you know what? A lot of times this is going to be taken care of for you. If you get a yes from a funder, yes, we're going to give you this grant. A lot of funders are going to say, we will, but we are going to check in with you every month at this time to see how the project's going. So in that case, you are going to have to keep tabs the whole time, really keep stats, see how you're doing, see if you're on the right track. However, if a funder does not specify that they want formative assessments and check-ins, you should do it anyway. And there's a couple of reasons. Well, the main reason for that is if you're not doing formative assessments, which I would assume if you're on the business side of things, of course you're going to be doing formative assessments because you're always going to be keeping track of your income, right? But in the nonprofit world, if they don't ask for formative assessments, do it anyway. What you don't want is a situation of, well, our project wraps up next Wednesday. I sure hope we did what we said we were going to do. You don't want to be surprised, right? So if you're checking in and getting assessments as you go, if you're not quite on track to meet the goal that you said you were going to do, you can kind of readjust and try to get that arrow trending upward again. So make sure you're staying on top of your project as it goes along. Now, I would say, now I want to talk about a couple of things really quick. There are questions that every proposal you're going to get asked these questions. You may not be asked in this exact way with this exact wording, but you're going to be asked these questions. One of which is, why are you the best organization to do this work? Now, for this one and the next slide we're going to talk about, I don't have a concrete answer for you. There's not one answer. I mean, I can give you a wrong answer. Why are you the best organization to do this work? Well, that's a good question. Now that I think about it, there's a lot of organizations out there that do similar things. They've been around for decades. They're really well known in the community. Matter of fact, you funded them in the past. You know what? Maybe we're not the best organization to do this work. That's the wrong answer. That's the only concrete thing I can give you. Outside of that, it's going to be individual for each one. But I think what they are really getting at goes back to something else that we talked about earlier. What are you doing differently that other similar, more well-known organizations aren't quite doing? What niche are you filling? What community need are you filling? So there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I think that's what they're really getting at. Another thing you could do is if you have people on your team whose community rings out in the neighborhood, they are in the community, they have lots of, experience, name drop them. Well, hey, someone else signed on to do this project with us or run this business with us. I know you've heard of them. You see what I'm getting at? I'm kind of making this up as I go along, right? There's no one answer, but don't be caught off guard by the question. What makes you stand out from other similar organizations? Which brings us to the next one. How will the project sustain itself in the long run? Here's the frustrating thing about this question, especially in the nonprofit world. I know this for a fact. This is from the nonprofit world. If you ask funders in the nonprofit world, what do you want to hear in this? They will literally tell you, we just want to think about it. We just want to know you thought about it. right? So again, no concrete answer here. One thing I always talk about in my classes is, while I can't give you the answer, a wrong answer would be like, how is this project going to sustain itself in the long run? Well, we're going to ask for a grant from you and only you. We're not doing any individual fundraising. So our plan is just to get the grant for the full amount that we asked for, run our organization off that. When that money runs out, we're just going to come back to you for another grant. No, that's a wrong answer. It could be anything. I know for my nonprofit people, you could say, well, this dude Kent at the library, he told me about a wonderful database called the Foundation Directory Online. I'm going to set up one-on-one sessions with him so I can really learn how to use that and find other potential funders. For your business needs, it could just be, like your growth plan, really, right? What are your projections? What do you plan to do? Do you plan to expand? So they just really want to know, what are your other potential streams of income? It's really what they're getting with that. They're not looking for a single answer, but they want to know that you've thought about it. It's kind of the bottom line on that one. And then the conclusion. Now, the conclusion, really, I don't want to say don't overthink it. I'm not saying you shouldn't spend time on it, but the conclusion is basically just a thank you for your time, and then highlight some of the main points about what you're trying to do. But one of the key things about the conclusion that I think people overlook, technically, you could write one conclusion to your proposal and just copy and paste that to every potential funder or investor that you send it to. Sure, you could do that. And if you do that, it doesn't mean you're not going to get the grant. But what I will say is, in roundtable discussions with funders, if they get a conclusion from an organization and it is clear that conclusion was written for them and only them, it makes you stand out, right? So this is where, remember that research portion I was hammering everybody about earlier on in the presentation? This is where that research portion comes in. The more you know about an organization, its history, what they like to fund, anything, if you throw in tidbits into your conclusion where they're reading it and going, wow, they really wrote this just for us, you will stand out from the pack, because most people don't do that. Is it more time consuming? Yes, but it can definitely kind of help you stand out a little bit. So something to consider for the conclusion, which finally brings us to the executive summary. Now, if you remember back to when I just did kind of the overall outline of a proposal, the executive summary was at the very top. And I know, especially in the nonprofit world, the executive summary is almost always going to be the very first thing that any funder asks for. But we're talking about it last. And it is the last thing you should write. The reason for that is, if you see on your screen, how do I reduce everything down to one page? Well, how do you know what everything is if you haven't done everything yet? So save your executive summary for last. Write that up. And again, this goes back, this is more important than the conclusion, what I'm about to say. Remember how I said for the conclusion, tailor it to each funder that you're applying to? You definitely should do this on the executive summary, and here's why. Remember how I talked about earlier for a review board for looking at grant proposals, not everyone's going to read everything. Like a budget person, a numbers person will probably really focus on the budget part of your proposal. Everyone is going to read that executive summary. So that numbers person is going to read your executive summary and then jump to your budget. A person with familiarity in projects, they're going to read your executive summary, then they're going to jump over and read how you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So that executive summary is super important. So once again, if you make that executive summary unique to each funder you apply to, you're really going to let them know that you are a proactive organization that really researches the people they reach out to, so you don't waste your time and you don't waste theirs. They'll realize that you're reaching out to them not because you just saw their bank account or saw they had a commercial on TV. You're doing it because you think they would be a good match. It really helps get your proposal off on the right foot. So I will share with you what goes into a typical executive summary. Now, I will go ahead and say, this executive summary that I'm going to be sharing with you, yes, this is definitely quite specific to nonprofits. But again, I think if you are definitely on the for-profit side, I think the overall vibe that I'm going to try to get across to you will help inform how you write executive summaries. So an executive summary in the nonprofit world, typically consists of 2 paragraphs, maybe 3. It's definitely no more than 1 page, but 2 paragraphs, maybe 3. The third paragraph, if there's a third paragraph, is basically just a thank you for your time sentence or 2. And I'm also going to share with you an order that these executive summaries typically shape up as, but please know this. If you're writing up an executive summary and the order that I share with you doesn't work for you, no problem. Don't worry about it. As long as the information's there, you're good. But again, this is just typically how it shapes up. The first paragraph tends to be a statement of need. Now, on the nonprofit world, the statement of need is not about how much money you need as an organization. The statement of need is about the community. Why do you exist as a nonprofit as well? So, for the business side of things, your statement of need, of course, it could be about the money, but it could also be about what community need are you filling with your business? What, you're not retreading everything, right? So the statement of need always starts off, and it's about the need in the community for what you do. Then a little bit about your organization, just a tiny bit. And then how much you're asking for. Why beat around the bush, right? They know you're coming to them for money, so just let them know right at the beginning. So again, that's the first paragraph in an executive summary, a statement of need, in other words, about the community, a little bit about your organization and how much you're asking for. The second paragraph is typically the goals and objectives that you have with the money that you're trying to get. So again, those are the 2 paragraphs. First paragraph, one more time, the statement of need, a little bit about your organization and how much you're asking for. Second paragraph are the goals and objectives of your business or your project if you're a nonprofit. And then maybe a third paragraph with a little bit about who you are, thank you for your time. All right, so that's your executive summary, which brings us to the supporting materials. Supporting materials are very hard to talk about because supporting materials are basically up to the funder, right? So while I can't tell you what the supporting materials are going to be, what I can tell you is they are not optional. So if a funder asks for something that you don't have, you can't just leave it out and say, I don't have that. You have to reach out to them and say, listen, this thing you asked for, we really don't have anything like that. What could we work with you on to supplement that, to meet that need? So nothing's optional. Follow the funder's guidelines. And if, as you see on your screen, it says include everything and very little else. I would change that to include everything and nothing else. I like to put it this way. If a funder asks for 10 things, they want 10 things. So don't send them 9.7 things and don't send them 10.2 things. If you send something that a funder didn't ask for, worst case scenario, not worst case, normally they're just going to throw it away. They'll probably throw it away, not look at it, never open it. Worst case scenario, you catch them on a bad day, they'll say, I didn't ask for this. They're not following directions, and that's a strike against you. Right? So really stick to that. Like you have to include everything and nothing else. For online applications, it's okay to add links where possible, with some caveats. This is professional writing. Like apparently this happens all the time. This is not the time for you to add a link to a GIF or a funny YouTube video, even if it's totally work appropriate. This is not the time for that. This is professional writing. So don't do that. Another thing is I personally think of links as supplemental materials. I can't help but fight the suspicion that most of the time, if you include a link on an online proposal, they're not going to open it. So if you have a nice chart or graph or something that you want to link to, do it, but also write out in full the exact stats you want them to know. Because again, I just have a feeling they are not going to use them. They're not going to open them. Another thing about links is, and apparently this happens all the time too, you can't do this. Remember how earlier on I said, what if you found a text box that says, tell us a little bit about your organization in 300 words or less. What a lot of people tend to do is, well, I could never tell you about my organization in that little amount of time. So here's a link to the About Us page on our website. There you go. Nope, not okay. They didn't ask for that. They asked for 300 words about your organization. And the last thing I'll share is, if you are going to share links, double, triple, quadruple, check that you are actually sending the link that you think you're sending. I have a friend that works for this place out on the West Coast. He is a soulless individual who is responsible for all the pop-up ads that you see when you're using your phone. Terrible person through and through. Apparently, his organization one time got a brand new, really big client. they were about to make this link or something or other. It's beyond my understanding. They were about to make something go live. This guy added a link into something. Well, he thought he was sending the right link, but what he had been doing was he had been chatting with his friends in the office and had just sent a link to a picture of his Halloween costume that year. So for a little while, if people clicked on this ad, they were taken to a picture of a dude dressed in a very shoddily made Captain Crunch costume. All right. Now, you can imagine there are way worse things that could happen with sharing links you didn't mean to share. My point is, if you're going to share a link, make sure you know what you're sending. It's very important that you do that. And then there's the follow-up. You're going to get a yes, you're going to get a no. If you get a yes, that's easy. Keep the funder informed, be responsive, do what you said you were going to do. Now, the do what you said you were going to do, that's not like, hey, if you get a grant, don't take that money and go buy a speedboat. Obviously, it's not that. What I think they're getting at is, let's say you give them your line item budget. They know exactly where every penny they give you is going to go. Well, you're doing those formative assessments that I talked about. You're checking in to make sure you're on path. Well, you see that you're not quite on target to meet the goal that you said you were going to meet. But you know that if you could divert some funds from one thing and put it toward another, it would put you back on track. Usually that's okay with the funder, but you have to ask them before they do it. That is not something that they want to find out at the end of the project. Even if all the money stayed firmly within the project, they don't want to know that you did other stuff with their money without their permission. So always ask before you do that. And then there's the follow-up if you get a no. Now, I think this, admittedly, I could be wrong, but I think this is probably a little bit more of a nonprofit thing of how to handle that. First of all, if you get a no, this is for nonprofit or for-profit, it's not personal. They're not going to give you the grant. Just if they say no, it's not because they didn't like you. It's because, remember what I said, funders typically say they can only fund about 30% of the proposals they get. That's all it is, nothing more than that. But you do have the right to find out why. Okay, so this part of it, I think, could apply to anyone. If you get a no on a grant proposal, you should absolutely follow up with them and say, thank you so much for taking the time to review my proposal. I really appreciate that. Is there anything we could do better in the future if we submit another proposal? Most of the time, they're going to say, no, we just can't fund everybody. But feedback on grant writing is so hard to get. So when you do find that funder that's willing to say, well, yeah, we like what you were doing, but this part of your proposal kind of didn't make sense to us. We didn't really understand what our money would have been doing there, so we didn't feel comfortable funding you. That is feedback that you can get. That can help you improve in the future. So you always should ask that question. Now, maybe more in the nonprofit world. I could be wrong. Maybe more in the nonprofit world. If you get that no, you ask why. They say, okay, you just couldn't fund me this time. Can I apply in the future? And they'll either say, yeah, go ahead, or they'll say, no, we're just not a good match, which is good to know. Then your follow-up question after that can be, do you have any recommendations of any organizations that you think might be a better match for funding for us? Now, in the nonprofit world, I could see in the for-profit world it being a bit more of a competitive industry in that sense of, giving loans or grants. But in the for-profit world, a lot of times organizations will be willing to point you toward a different organization. And this is a very underutilized strategy from folks when they get funding, right? If they get a no, ask if there are recommendations. And if they are willing to make a recommendation, if you feel like the conversation's going okay, you feel like, you have a good rapport with them, sometimes they will even be willing to make the introduction for you, copy you on an email, say, hey, look, I think you should talk to these folks at this business. I think they're good people. I think you might be a good funding match for them. They might be willing to do that. But the bottom line, you got to know, move on, keep looking, seek different prospects. You're going to get more no's. It's just going to happen. The best grant writers in the world get a lot of no's, right? You're just not going to get yeses every time. Most of the time, it's not anything you did wrong. It just wasn't your time. So, just get back to it, keep improving, and get on it. So there's a couple of key takeaways from this I want to share with you. And then there's a couple of resources. I would be remiss if I didn't share at least a couple of things with you, one of which tangentially ties into grant writing. The other one definitely does. So some of the key takeaways from this is start with an outline, keep the language clear and concise, focus. And by that, this is professional writing, right? I want to go back to that. Your organization is not the most crazy, awesome, amazing, cool organization out there. professional writing. Keep it simple, get to the point. It's not a time to show off how many adjectives you know. Focus on the funder's interests, follow the funder's guidelines, and revise and edit before submitting. It will be painfully clear if you are submitting a proposal that no revision happened. And if possible, get some other poor sucker to revise it for you. If you are writing the proposal, you've spent so much time with it. If you left out words, you left out phrases, your brain will fill in what you meant to say. So having someone else can really help improve your proposal. Something I like to do is, when possible, if I can get someone to review a proposal for me that is not part of the project, has no knowledge of the project, if someone without any inside information can read your proposal and get the basic gist of what's going on with everything, you're on the right track. So revising and editing is definitely important. If you are the only person, you can't get anyone to revise it for you, do that thing they taught you in school. I try to give myself about a week of cutoff time at least, where I'm like, I'm done. I'm going to call myself done at this point. This week is just going to be revising and editing before I send it off. Look over it, revise it, mark it up, and then step away from it for a day. Come back to it with fresh eyes. That's one of those old-fashioned tips from school. As far as starting with the outline, if anyone is joining me today who is definitely thinking about going the nonprofit route or already works for a nonprofit, I have a wonderful resource to share with you, and I'd like you to email me outside of today's session, and I would be happy to share that with you. I don't think it would pertain to a lot of folks here, so I'm not going to bother anybody with it. But I have a great outline document for nonprofit grant writing, so feel free to reach out to me about that if anyone would like to do so. All right. So the last thing I do want to share with everybody, kind of before we officially wrap everything up, there's a couple of resources I want to share with you. Now, the first one I'm going to share with you, we have it here at the Cincinnati Library. It's a library resource, but I really feel like no matter where you're joining us from, you're probably going to have access to this database. And the database I wanted to share with you is called Data Solutions. And there we go. Sorry, Reference Solutions. And most public library, remember how I said you're going to have to find evidence to back up your need? You'll be able to use this for some demographics, but a big thing that they have for businesses is the consumers and lifestyles section. So you can kind of look up and see, like, what certain areas do people like to buy what kind of things are people interested in. You can also use this tool to search for where is business, where's oversaturation. I want to start a business in this area because no one within a 10-mile radius does what we're going to do. Data Solutions can be a very, very good resource for that. Again, most public libraries are going to have this resource. I'm not going to pretend to tell you that it's the most powerful demographics tool there is. Admittedly, most of the best business databases and demographics databases are priced out of public libraries these days. That's the unfortunate truth of the matter. But most are going to have this, and this can at least help a little. Another thing I definitely wanted to share with you, one last resource, is LinkedIn Learning, which you should see here. LinkedIn Learning, I'm sure this was I don't know if anyone ever saw it. I remember seeing a big billboard campaign for something called lynda.com. Lynda.com became LinkedIn Learning. We all know what LinkedIn is. LinkedIn Learning, you can think of it as basically YouTube, but not just any Yahoo can post to it, right? So I'm sharing this with you because you will find lots of courses on LinkedIn Learning, which is available at most libraries, I'm pretty sure. I know we have it here at Cincinnati. You will find some great suites of videos on grant writing. And the good thing about LinkedIn Learning is, like, if you find a video on LinkedIn Learning, it is hosted either by an industry professional, a professor who teaches on the subject. These are vetted informations. You can think of it as, like you go to certain databases for scholarly journals, right? Well, these are vetted and trustworthy videos. So that's another resource I wanted to share with you. If you have questions about any of these specifically to the Cincinnati Library and you are in the Cincinnati area, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to help you with that. And with that, that's kind of my wrap up of the grant writing portion of this. So,
Okay. Kent, there's a question. How do you differentiate yourself from others submitting similar requests for funds?
Yeah, and again, that's always going to be tough, right? But it really does go back to, I know it sounds like I'm just going back to a point I've already made. I think the best way to differentiate yourself is to know what's already out there, all right? If you're a nonprofit, know what nonprofits do similar to you. If you are a business, you really need to know, like, whatever region you intend to impact, right? How many are there businesses out there already doing what you do, even if it's only somewhat correlated? Know who's out there, know how many there are, know where they are. So know the location of everything, because where those businesses are, that's going to spread out their impact. And so you really just kind of need to know what's already out there, so you can say, look, I know you've heard of this organization. They're great, but here's what they do. Here's what we do, and here's who is going to be impacted by it. And again, especially for the for-profit side of things, that reference solutions, they do have a pretty good, their business search. You can look at it in map form. You can look at it in spreadsheet form. So you can really look and make sure that what you're trying to do isn't already oversaturated. So it's really about just knowing what's out there differently. But again, the other thing to differentiate yourself is, and again, I'm just going to hammer a point I already shared with you. Most people, for proposals of all types, they essentially type up one document, and then they copy and paste that document into every proposal that they send, and they just do like a find and replace for the name of the funder that they're applying to. That's not something that's automatically going to not get you funding. But again, every sentence that you write in your proposal, everything you say to a funder, every email that you write, anything that you can make about them and only them instead of about potentially any funding organization, that's a good way to stand out to them, because they'll know you did your research.
Also, I think with funders, it's all about them, really. They want to look good and look good in the community, and so they're you're helping them to do that by following through with their money. I mean, and how you use your money and how your program impacts the community. It gives them.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm just saying that it makes them look good. So that's what you're really trying to do. It's kind of like dating, I think, is where you're looking at whether or not you guys match up as far as your value systems.
But it could be as simple as, to a point that you made. That's another thing about that is, you could think of it as far as advertising for them. Like, how are you going to get their logo? What are you going to do with their logo? Right? Where are you going to plaster their logo? I know, especially in the nonprofit world, if you get a grant from someone, there's probably going to be stipulations. Okay, but you have to put our logo on your website, and it has to take up this much space. Or if you're writing a banner, our logo has to be the biggest banner. So it is kind of a win-win, which is to your point, right? What's in it for them? What do they get out of it? So yes, will you be able to take their money, impact the community, and make them look good on that front? Sure, but also, how will you help them get the word out that they exist in the first place?
Any other questions? Just want to plug for libraries. Yes. As far as Ohio libraries and academic libraries, we often don't always just serve the people in our local areas. I know with the state of Ohio that even if you are in Southeast Ohio, you can actually get a Columbus or Cincinnati library card because you live in the state of Ohio. So, and then there's some stuff about, I know we have relationships because we're near the border that we can serve people in West Virginia as well. So there's things like that that you might say, oh, my local library is very small, but you do have access to some of the bigger libraries as well.
Very good point. And to piggyback on top of that, I said a lot of the public libraries won't be able to afford the more super powerful databases that sometimes academic libraries, universities can afford the bigger databases than public libraries. And a lot of times I don't know about your organization, but I know some will allow people to come in person and use some of their database resources.
Right. A lot of the Ohio Link libraries, which is Ohio Link is the Ohio Academic Library Consortia throughout the state of Ohio, we have to make our resources available. So it does to the public. Now we can't give them off-campus access to those resources, but if they come and visit in person, then we can provide access to those databases. And that's the same goes for Ohio State or Ohio University. The one thing right now, though, is with COVID, some places may have some restrictions on who they let in. I know we're open to the public, but some other libraries in larger areas might not be.
Yeah, bottom line, call before you just show up at an academic library. If you don't have an affiliation with the university, call before you just show up. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Also, Kent, you had mentioned something from the Kellogg organization. I didn't catch your
Sure.
The URL for that. Could you put that in the chat?
Yes, wkkf.org. I just put it in there.
What was the publication's name?
Yeah, I'm typing, search their site for evaluation handbook. So on their site, I think it's still in the top right corner. You'll see that little magnifying glass like most websites have. Click that and just search for the phrase evaluation handbook. It'll be the first, it should be the first thing that comes up. It always is for me. It's from 2017 at this point, but overall evaluations are evaluations. So I think that's one of the more helpful things for that I've seen.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Anything else? We're available to answer your questions. And
you also have my email address that Amy so nicely put in there. You know, if you're like me, the second that we close this session, you're like, oh, there's my question. Or if you're just, you know, some people are too shy to ask in front of everyone, just reach out.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you. We'll hang out here a little bit longer and then go from there.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. And it's been a very interesting topic there.
Thank you to Shonda. Is it rainy where everybody else is today? Are most people in the Cincinnati area here?
It's raining in Southeast Ohio over on the other side. We're down near the West Virginia border.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, of course you're right. Yeah. Yeah, everywhere. Huh. Dayton, someone from Dayton. I think Dayton, the Dayton Public Library has the single best grants resource librarian in the country. Her name is Susan Rodenberg. She is fantastic for like nonprofit grant stuff. And your downtown main library in Dayton, Ohio is, I'm so jealous of your, I'm so jealous of your main branch.
Don't they have a business center there as well?
They do, yeah. Well, my understanding is they still do, yeah. Actually, I think I saw.
It's been a while since I've been there, but I thought they had like a business resource center.
Yeah, I think the grants and the business, the nonprofit and business resource center are all kind of in the same area there.
But it's a beautiful library.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is the part where I could bring up something about, you know, the Super Bowl and the Bengals, but I will admit I'm not from Cincinnati for one, and I'm also not a huge football person, but you know, and that would be the way that I would kind of, you know, fill in this time. Seemed like it was a good game from what little I understand about it.
Except the Bengals lost.
I know that, yes, except for that. Yeah, that's the main point there. But.
And I guess a quarterback, he's from this area, and he hurt his knee.
I did like the halftime show a lot.
I did. Yeah. That's what I watch it for. So.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you, Kent, and we'll take care. See you.
Have a good one, everybody.